Good evening. Hello, everyone. I have to, oh my gosh, look at all these faces. This is just so exciting, and I'm going to go off my own script, my own speech for a moment, and just say that it is absolutely wonderful to see I'm just looking, this is wonderful to see all of these faces. I won't call names, but I hope that you all come to the reception so I have the opportunity to see you and talk to you in person. Thank you so much, President Kazee. I really do appreciate that. Wonderful introduction, and good evening to members of the faculty and staff and students of this fine institution, the University of Evansville, and those of you who come from the Evansville community. I need not pause to say how very special this moment is for me. I'm so delighted to be with you this evening, and it is a tremendous honor to serve as the speaker for the Bill and Rose Mays Lectureship. For this opportunity, I express my sincere and heartfelt appreciation to President Kazee, Bill and Rose Mays, LaToya Smith, and I just want to publicly state how very proud I am of LaToya Smith. I had the opportunity to know LaToya when she first came to the University of Evansville as a student, and she spent several hours in my office, and I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to engage her as a student, and it is just incredible to see how she has blossomed into a wonderful professional and how committed she is to the University of Evansville being the best that it can be by working on diversity. Also, I want to thank the planning committee who did stand, so I had the opportunity to see who you were for planning this wonderful celebration, and again for inviting me back to be here with you. And I would be remiss, actually I was told that I had to do this. I had to give a shout out from the Texas Exes to Rose Mays, who is an alumna of the University of Texas at Austin. So I wanted to say that. They said you can't do it at dinner. Burnt orange. Indeed, it is a very rich and rewarding experience for me to be back here on the UE campus and to see so many friends and former colleagues almost 10 years after I began working at the University of Evansville under the incredible leadership of Mr. Jack Varner and former President Steve Jennings. And although it has already been 3.5 years since I left here, or my employment ended, the University of Evansville is still very dear to me and holds a very special place in my heart. For example, one day last fall, after watching some sports, I got home and shared with Preston, my husband, we won. And his quick response was appropriately, who won? Is it UT, Vanderbilt, UE? I don't know these days. Who are you talking about? And while I was talking about Vanderbilt on that occasion, it is very true that I still talk about UE very often and on many occasions with friends that we now have in Austin, Texas. So UE is part of my we circle. However, as much as I do love UE, I must admit that I do have some hook'em, who knows about hook'em other than Rose, hook'em Longhorns. I have some hook'em burnt orange blood in these veins now, and this weather is way too cold for me. My blood has gotten too thin for this. I actually had to run out to the mall to get tights. I said, it's too cold. Nevertheless, I'm very happy to be in Purple Aces country tonight. And on a more serious note, and in line with the theme for this year's MLK lectureship, I am very happy to talk about social justice. And I'd like to talk about social justice against the backdrop of something that is very important to me, and that is philanthropy. And I'll start by telling you a story that my mother, a most memorable story that she shared with me about a moment during her childhood. She shared a story of how she grew up in a wonderful community with wide streets and cobble-like walkways and tall oak trees and magnolia trees. All the families knew each other. Everyone cared for each other. The children played every day, and they were always looking to my mother, who was the oldest among her friends, to determine what they would do, what activities they were going to engage in on that day. And as she put it, they had real fun. We were outside, we did real fun stuff. One day, she said, a new family moved across the street. They had 3 children who only played on their side of the street. They never came over to play with my mother or her friends, they just watched. After a few weeks, one of my mother's friends, one of her friends said that he was going over to the house of the new family. She said, "Don't go," but he slowly crossed the street anyway. The other children looked to her for direction because, again, she was the oldest. She said nothing, and they watched their friend slowly cross the street, walk up the driveway slowly, then ring the doorbell. When the father opened the door, her friends dashed across the street and left her standing there alone. They all went inside the home. The father, who had opened the door, noticed her standing there, and he opened the door a little wider. She didn't move. She told me that she wanted to, but she just felt stuck. She and the father looked at each other, and he opened the door even wider. She knew she was making a mistake, but she stood her ground. The father slowly closed the door. A short while later, her friends came back and they were so excited, laughing and jumping with joy. They could not believe what had just happened. You see, her friends did not go over to the house to meet the children. They went to meet the father. They went to meet Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the same father who welcomed the children and kept opening the door wider and wider, waiting for her to come across the street. I decided to share this story with you for 2 reasons. The most obvious one, and the first one, is that it is the most personal account I have of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The second reason is the focus of my keynote this evening. I believe this story provides us with a simple yet powerful guiding principle of how each and every one of us can be a soldier of social justice. This simple yet powerful principle is commit to leave no one behind. Commit to leave no one behind. I think we can all remember a time in our life when we were left behind, or we felt as if we were being left behind. Reflect for a moment on how that felt. How did it feel when you felt as if you were being left out or left behind? Now, think about a time when you know that someone was purposeful in not leaving you behind. Someone was extending a hand to you, saying a kind word, or simply believing in you, giving you enough confidence to persevere maybe, so that you would not be left behind. In my own life, I have several examples of people who've made such a commitment. Some I know, like my family members. Many more I know that I do not know. Certainly all the pioneers and participants with the civil rights movement would fall into that category. For example, I can remember when I always knew from a child that going to college was not an option. My parents and extended family had extended in me very early a very strong belief that education was the key to success in life. They told me that I would encounter trials and tribulations along my life journey, but that education was the one thing that no one could ever take away from me. Regardless of what jobs I may lose, what successes, what money I may lose, education would always be there, and it was my responsibility to get that education. I accepted this value wholesale. being an honor roll student in elementary school, middle school, high school, and then it was time for college. I went to Rollins College, as President Kazee said, a small private liberal arts school in Winter Park, Florida. And in my freshman year, my first semester, I almost flunked out. I earned a 1.66 GPA. 1.66. The good student, a 1.66. I was shocked. I didn't know how it happened. My parents were furious, and they pulled absolutely no punches in letting me know that was unacceptable and that I needed to fix it and get it right. The next semester, I figured it out and I did better. By the time I graduated from Rollins, I had gotten my GPA up to over a 3.0, but it took a lot of work, and for those of you who are college students, you know how hard it is to pull up a GPA when you've done really badly. Some people have people in their lives, again, who are committed to not leaving them behind, committed to giving them that encouragement, that support, that honest feedback, and that tough love needed for them to overcome obstacles, as I said earlier. I had this with my parents when it came time for me to fix it during that second semester of my freshman year. That experience which threatened to derail my college experience. Then there are others who do not have these people in their lives. Would my story be different if there wasn't a mom or a dad to say to me, that's unacceptable and you will do better? Or a mom or dad to say to them, well, we know that you messed up, but we're going to help you. We're still going to support you with your education. Would my story be different if there was no mom and dad and no Rollins College scholarship paying for school, permitting me to focus on academics and not have to work hours during the week? Well, I say that it's very likely that the story would be different. But I also think that I could have the same story. The story would be the same even if there weren't a mom or a dad, but if there was a mentor or a counselor or a volunteer, someone saying the same things that my mother and my father said to me. I think that exemplifies not leaving someone behind. And there's evidence that this principle of not leaving others behind is woven throughout the entire fabric of the civil rights movement and also the life of Dr. King. The civil rights movement was about ensuring that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was available to all citizens of the United States of America, leaving no one behind, leaving no one out of that. As a civil rights activist, Dr. King was recognized for his example of civic responsibility in the United States, and his fight for equality continues today. His lectures and his dialogues stirred a nation and sparked the conscience of a generation. The movements and marches that he led brought significant changes to this fabric that I mentioned earlier, and through his courage and selfless devotion, changed America for the better. This devotion gave direction to 13 years of a movement, 13. And just as Dr. King's leadership during the civil rights movement embodied the code of committing to not leave others behind on the national stage and in front of cameras with thousands of people, my mother's account illustrates that this code permeated his life, his private life, away from the cameras with a couple of neighborhood children. He did not simply believe in social justice, he embodied it. Yet, with the formal civil rights movement over and with the legislation of equality in part, I have talked to many who find it challenging to understand what social justice looks like today on one end of the spectrum, and others on the other end of the spectrum who question the validity of social justice today. Likely, it's because when talking about social justice, you get into this territory of complexity and very dynamic things. If you ask people to define social justice, you're going to get many different definitions. For example, definitions will be based on a variety of factors like political orientation, religious background, and political and social philosophy. If you, as a former philosophy major, I think if you were to ask a postmodernist about this concept, he or she is likely to tell you it's a fairy tale that is not in any way achievable in any form of society. A general definition of social justice then is very hard to arrive at and even harder to implement. However, I believe that there are no excuses for not trying. I assert that social justice is concerned with equal justice, not just in the courts, but in all aspects of society. This concept demands that people have equal rights and opportunities. Everyone, from the poorest of the poor to the wealthiest of the wealthiest. But who should be responsible for making sure that our society is just and fair? How do you implement policies regarding social justice? Alternately, should you legislate for justice in society or merely rely on the moral compass of society's members? Well, from one political stance, the belief is that you must legislate to create a just society, and various programs need to exist in order to collect monies needed to even the playing field between those who are wealthy and those who are poor, those who are or may be routinely marginalized from society. Equal rights can be defined as equal access to things that make it possible for people in any societal sector to be successful. Therefore, this philosophy of social justice would support things like anti-discrimination laws and equal opportunity programs, and would favor those things. This perspective would argue that there are certain basic needs that must be offered to all. These include things like truly equal education and safety in school, and programs that would help children have the financial opportunity to attend college. This perspective holds that a just society cannot be had unless everyone has access to food, safe shelter, and medical care, for example. Another political stance equally endorses a just society, but may criticize those who make poor choices and feel that while equal opportunity should exist, a government should not legislate this. In fact, it is argued that social justice is diminished from this perspective when governments create programs to deal with it, especially when these programs may call for greater taxation. Instead, this perspective holds that people should just look to philanthropy for making things just. And then there's the religious perspective, or there is a religious perspective. You'll find people all over the political spectrum who argue for social justice. Many Christian groups believe that you bring about justice through Christ-like actions of mercy, especially those that help people who've been marginalized by society. The postmodern critique on the idea of just society provokes an interesting debate, and I've already mentioned some of those questions. But in societies like the US, which hinge on creating social justice, we have distinct problems. We have problems like hunger, homelessness, and problems with making sure all children receive the same standard of education. This is no reason to abandon attempting to promote a just society and trying to aim for it. Yet, due to the complex nature of society, some argue that the US may not ever fully achieve justice for all, and the debate of how to achieve this is ongoing. The civil rights movement was wonderful in that it offers to us a very tangible example of social justice achievement. This movement worked to free people from oppression and guarantee equal rights. The suffrage movement was like that as well, the right to be treated equally under law. Given this complexity that I've just laid out, from the political perspectives to the religious perspective, I think that social justice is, again, as simple as committing to not leave others behind. So if you'll indulge me and accept that definition of social justice, the question then becomes, how do we do that? While I'm certain that there are many ways to do this, I will focus on but one, and that is to treat people well by way of philanthropy. Or more specifically, be philanthropic by giving of your time, your talent, and/or your treasure. For the purpose of context, I think it's important to note that the act of being philanthropy is entrenched in the roots of America. Our country's soils have been toiled with generosity and altruism and revered by many countries and individuals in other parts of the world. The most recognized of these individuals is Alexis de Tocqueville. In 1831, he, a French civil servant, traveled to America to study America and to work extensively on the American phenomena of forming associations or being philanthropic. It is in this discussion of associations or philanthropy that we understand how de Tocqueville's observations relate to our society. How important it is to give of your time, talent, and treasure. The backbone of the civil rights movement was made up of these types of organizations that pushed society, and it was the time, talent, and treasure of lots of people in those organizations that made them work. Tocqueville's description of philanthropy is an enduring impact on democracy in America. His extensive analysis of the role philanthropy played in strengthening and moderating democracy is widely cited. He viewed the proliferation of philanthropy associations as a unique response that was not only critical to the success of the experiment of democratic government, but also served to provide the well-being of all its citizens in accordance with the sense of equality that had been previously unknown. By forming and joining these associations that were focused on philanthropy, he saw Americans as casting a sort of ballot about the issues which are important to them, their families, and to their communities. In linking the ideals of philanthropy with democracy, Tocqueville showed that America's success as a non-aristocracy relied on philanthropy to provide for his people. Likewise, he foresaw the importance of these charitable organizations in providing for the common welfare of people. He observed that associating with other people to improve the common welfare requires personal sacrifice. He said, quote, "The love and respect of your neighbors must be gained by a long series of small services, hidden deeds of goodness, a persistent habit of kindness, and an established reputation of selflessness." Tocqueville recognized, applauded, and immortalized American philanthropy on behalf of the common good. The civil rights movement greatly contributed to and benefited from the nonprofit sector and philanthropy, and exemplifies what Tocqueville spoke of. Many nonprofit organizations were created during this time specifically to support and assist in the orchestration of the events that were part of that movement. These organizations were staffed mostly by volunteers who gave of their time, acted as facilitators for change that may not have happened without their existence. We have the NAACP that was formed in 1909 by Americans, and it sought to bring about legal solutions to America's race problems. Influential members like Charles Hamilton Houston, W.E. Du Bois, just to name a few, were instrumental in this organization becoming a litigating powerhouse. Again, volunteers. Or the Council for Racial Integration, or CORE, flourished during the Civil Rights Movement, initially engaging in sit-ins and picketing campaigns to desegregate public accommodations in Northern American cities. CORE eventually became a participant in the Freedom Rides. Using its organizing skills to register voters, thousands of volunteers made CORE's work a success. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, created on the campus of Shaw University in North Carolina, is another example of volunteerism at work, associations at work, and philanthropy at work. And of course, there's the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that was founded by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1957 and a host of other ministers. And this group, of course, or obviously, sought to attack inequality and injustice with the use of nonviolent direct action. While it did not pioneer this tactic, SCLC successfully used this method to desegregate lunch counters, swimming pools, libraries, theaters, and a host of other public accommodations. With Dr. King as its president, the SCLC succeeded in raising enough money to keep the civil rights movement alive. The SCLC, under Dr. King's leadership, raised enough money to keep the civil rights movement alive. So, although civic responsibility has existed for centuries in society, it was officially blueprinted for democracy in 1787 by the ratification of the United States Constitution. The Constitution declared that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. As citizens of the U.S., being philanthropic then might be our civic responsibility, as evidenced by the civil rights movement. It is paramount to the success of democracy. By engaging in civic responsibility, citizens ensure and uphold certain democratic values written in the Constitution. I know this is getting a little academic, but I feel like this is so important. By engaging in civic responsibility, citizens ensure and uphold certain democratic values written in the Constitution, and I just read that. Those values or duties include justice, freedom, equality, diversity, due process, property, participation, truth, rule of law, self-respect, justice. Centuries after our founding, the world in which we live is a geographical one. So now this expands beyond the U.S. Constitution. It's a flat one, as we've heard said, and we are challenged to make it one in terms of humanity. This flatness exists to a large extent through human scientific ingenuity. Dr. King spoke about this in a speech that he gave in 1958. And the same is true today. The world is flat. Through our scientific genius, we have been able to dwarf distance and place, time and change. We can travel across the world in hours. Someone once said, a comedian once said, we live in an age in which it is possible to take a nonstop flight from Los Angeles, California to New York City, a distance of some 3,000 miles, and if on taking off in Los Angeles, you develop hiccups, you will hic in Los Angeles and cup in New York City. All jokes aside, the point I'm trying to make here is that we have made our world flat. I think Dr. King would say that is not enough. It's not enough to make our world flat geographically. I think he would say that we must go further. And because of our civic responsibility, we must make of it a neighborhood. A neighborhood that's like my mother's neighborhood. A neighborhood where people look out for one another. A neighborhood where no one is left behind. This is true for us as people. I think it's also true for organizations as well. Organizations have a responsibility to ensure that others are not left behind. No act of kindness is too small. No gift of your time or your talent is too minimal. And philanthropy, the love of people, gives us renewed purpose and meaning to do that. Again, it's absolutely wonderful to be back here in Evansville. I love this city with all my heart. I have great, cherished memories that I talk about often, as I mentioned earlier, and my family extends their warm welcomes to you as well. Thank you so much.